Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. My name's Jane. So today's video is a full tutorial on how to make the Dixie Dress and Blouse, my latest sewing pattern. So hi everyone, before we get into the tutorial, I just want to give you a little bit of an introduction into the Dixie Dress and Blouse. So as the title says, it is a dress, but it also comes in a smock length and also the blouse version. Gorgeous ruffled neckline, slightly oversized bodice, has pockets if you want, 2 skirt lengths, and then there's the peplum length to create the blouse. There's 2 sleeves, elbow length sleeve and also the longer sleeve. Sleeve cuff is faced, so there's no exposed elastic or anything like that, and it has a really sweet button placket. Now I put 3 buttons on, but the instructions say you can add 4 or 5, depends on your preference. So obviously if you're going to go for 4 or 5, then you need to adjust the spacing evenly to accommodate that. I'm going to be using a lovely floral floaty fabric for today's tutorial, but the dress on the blouse is so versatile. It can be made in any light to medium weight fabrics, super versatile, and I've designed this pattern so it can be an all season sewing pattern. So obviously with the short sleeves you could choose maybe a lighter weight cotton or maybe a floaty chiffon or a crepe for the warmer months, and then if you wanted to wear it in the autumn winter like I am today, you can make it in chambray, light to medium weight denim, needle cord. Really a versatile sewing pattern as well. It comes in sizes extra small to 2XL, which covers the size range of size 6 all the way up to 22. So without further ado, let's get sewing. So first things first, I'm going to be making my own bias. You don't have to, you can also use ready-made bias, and I have used 5cm strips cut on the bias, and I'm just going to join my strips at 90-degree angles, pin it along the diagonal there and sew across. And I just normally add a few strips to make plenty of bias, just so I don't run out. And because I'm using a directional print, I have to make sure that I've got my design of the fabric all going the right way. So make sure if you are using a directional print that you have your bias going the right way. So I'm just going to sew those pieces together to make my bias strip. So I'm just going to sew across from one diagonal to the other. And then when you fold it back, you have a nice neat join. And then just trim off any excess and press those seams open and trim off any dog ears that are hanging out. And then we're going to put it to one side until we're ready to use it later on. So next up we're going to be adding the pockets. Now if you're going to be using the blouse version, there is no pockets because obviously the pockets would hang way too below the peplum, and if you're going to be using the smock length, that you would use the notch for the smock length, which is slightly higher on the skirt pattern, just to accommodate the pocket bags not hanging below the smock length. But whatever length you choose, make sure you place your pockets at the right notch on the pattern piece. And then overlocking all my pieces, the sides of the skirt and all the pocket bags, and then I'm just lining up the top of my pocket to match up with the notch for the maxi dress that I'm doing today. But if you're doing the smock, your notch for the smock would be slightly higher, and obviously if you're doing the blouse you wouldn't be putting pockets on at all. Alternatively, you can do the smock and the maxi without any pockets too, so if that's the case you just omit this step. So I'm just pinning my bags, giving it press and pinning the pocket bags matching up those notches on the side, and then pin in place, and then I'm just going to take them over to the machine and sew. But I'm not going to be sewing at 1 centimetre seam allowance, which the majority of this sewing pattern is done in. I am going to be using the edge of my overlock, and I'm going to be using that as a guide, and I'm just going to be stitching my pockets just beyond the overlock stitching, so it's about 1/4 of an inch, and stitch all 4 pocket bags the same way. And then once those pocket bags are stitched in place, and I'm going to flip the pocket bags out with the seam allowance facing out towards the pocket bags, and then I'm just going to do a row of understitching. You will see in a minute, just a row of understitching just to give a nice neat finish. So here I am just now pressing the seam allowance out, and you can see I'm just doing understitching there on the pocket bags, and you repeat that for all 4 pockets. So you can see I'm just stitching within that overlock stitching, but 1/4 of an inch in, and that's the only time we will not use the 1 centimetre seam allowance from here on in. So now I've got the pocket bags all stitched on in place. I'm just going to give it all a quick press, and then I'm going to pin my skirt front and skirt back together at the side seams, and then we're just going to stitch it all in place. 1 centimetre seam allowance. So when you get to the machine, you're going to sew from the top, and you're going to sew approximately 1 centimetre beyond where the pocket bag starts. And then you're going to leave your needle in position, and then you're going to raise your presser foot and pivot, then sew all the way around the pocket bag, all the way around to the bottom, and again stitch across back on to the skirt, approximately 1 centimetre beyond, and then leave your needle down, pivot again, and then stitch all the way down to the bottom of the skirt. And then I'm just going to clip into the seam allowance there, not into the stitching obviously, just above the pocket and below the pocket, just so you can press your seams open. And then we're going to turn up our hem by 2 centimetres. I've overlocked the edge of my hem there first of all, and turn up by 2 centimetres. I'm actually using 1 centimetre on my dress there because I ran a little bit short of fabric, so I'm just turning it up by 1 centimetre. So, you know, whatever you want to use to turn up your hem, feel free to adjust accordingly, but 2 centimetres is just the standard amount that I've given in the pattern, but feel free to adjust it if you need to. So I'm just pinning it in place, and I'm just going to stitch it all the way around on the machine. And then once we've done that, I'm going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top of the skirt piece, working from the centre front notch all the way around to the centre back notch. And then again another row, same again. So there we go, just adjust my stitch length to 5. A nice long stitch ready for the gathering. So just 2 rows of gathering stitches, usually I usually not put my foot on the edge of the fabric for the first row, and then a few millimetres inwards for the second row. So moving on to the bodice pieces now, we'll put the skirt aside for one moment, and I'm just going to pin the darts, pin and sew the darts, matching up the notches, and just sew my darts. And once they're stitched, I then press them down towards the waist. So press them downwards. And then once they're all nice and neat and pressed, we're then going to work on the button placket. Now, depending on what fabric you're using, obviously I'm using this viscose chalet today, so it's quite a floopy, slippery kind of fabric, so I'm going to be putting a strip of interfacing on my placket just to give it some stability. But if you're using a more heavier medium weight fabric, you might not necessarily need to do this. I'm just adding a strip just down the middle there, and then we're just going to press over at the first notch. There's a notch there on the top and the bottom by 1 centimetre, and then we're going to press it over again to meet up with the last notch, and then just pin down in place, and that is your button placket ready to be top stitched. So you can see me adding my interface strip there, press over by 1 centimetre by the notches, and then we're going to press it over again to meet the next notch at the top and the bottom, and then pin in place. Ready to top stitch on your machine. I'm just stitching a couple of millimetres away from the edge, and repeat that for both plackets. So once we've got the placket stitched, we can then put the front bodice pieces on to the back, pin at the side seams and the shoulder seams, and then we're going to stitch them in place using 1 centimetre seam allowance. And then once we've stitched them, we're going to neaten the edges. Now I'm using the overlocker throughout this tutorial. You don't have to use an overlocker. If you don't have one, you can use zigzag stitch, or you can also use French seams, or you can also use pinking shears, whatever is your preferred method, but I'm using the overlocker throughout. So just stitching the side seams and the shoulder seams, making sure that your dart is pressed downwards when you're sewing, and again just neaten those edges. And then we're just going to give our seams a press. I like to press throughout, always gives a much professional and neater finish. Press as you go. And now we are moving on to the ruffle. So you see there's a notch in the centre back, and then you need to make a 1/4 notch on either side, so you know you can match up those notches with your shoulder seams and the centre back of your blouse. And I'm just neatening the lower edge of the ruffle and the side edges, and then I'm just going to use my overlock edge, going to press it over once and then press it over again twice on the edge, both edges there, short edges, and then we'll do exactly the same on the bottom edge, and then we're just going to top stitch all the way around. So I generally do the side edges first, and once I've stitched the side edges, I will then fold over the hem just the same and then stitch it in place. You can see me just folding over by the overlock and over again, and that gives you a nice neat hem edge. Now once we've done that, we're then going to set our machine length to the longer stitch again, and then we're going to do 2 rows of gathering stitch along the top edge of the ruffle, ready to gather and attach to the bodice. So just 2 rows working within the seam allowance there. Quick press, and then I'm going to mark with my chalk pencil where my notches are, because this fabric is quite frayy. I don't want to lose my notches, so I'm just marking with my chalk pencil where my centre back notches and where my 1/4 point notches are. So when I do gather it, I can find those places easy. You can add pins as well, but sometimes the pins fall out. And then I'm just going to pull the 2 threads and gather. And then I'm going to pin it wrong side to the right side of the bodice along the neckline. And what we're going to do is we're going to place the edge of our ruffle matching up with the stitching line on the placket, where the placket is. So just pin your ruffle to the neckline wrong side to the right side, and then match up your notches, match up your centre back notch of your ruffle with the centre back notch of your bodice, and then your 1/4 point roughly with your shoulder seam points. So just match them all up and then adjust your gathers evenly. So your ruffle starts where your top stitch of your placket is and ends on the opposite side where the top stitch of the placket is. So you've got like the placket not covered by the ruffle. If you can see there where my hand is, you can see the placket does not have any ruffle on it. It stops just there by the stitching. I'm just adjusting, popping my pins in, and we're just going to stitch it in place, but we're not going to use 1 centimetre seam allowance. I just like to stitch it maybe 1/4 of an inch, because all we're doing really is stitching it in place, because the bias trim is then going to go on top. So it's just literally stay stitching it in place. So just stitch all the way along, take your pins out, just making sure your gathers are nice and even as you go. And then once we've got the ruffle on, then we're going to then add our bias trim. So I'm just removing my gathering stitches. I'm just going to give it a quick press so the ruffle and the gathers are nicely pressed. So I've got a nice flat surface to add my bias. Now we're going to be working right side of the bias with the wrong side of the bodice this time. And I like to leave a couple of centimetres extending on the end. And we're just going to stitch it 1 centimetre seam allowance, gently pulling that bias, just gently, all the way along, making sure your ruffle underneath does not get in the way. Make sure the ruffle underneath is nice and flat below. And just gently sew and ease that bias onto the neckline, and then just trim off, maybe leave about 2 centimetres, and then again give it all a nice press. And then we're going to turn over that bodice, and then we're going to fold over the binding. So fold over the end there neatly, get your iron, press it down, and then fold the bias down towards the edge of the neckline there, and then fold it over again so it covers the line of stitching below. So fold it down once by about 1 centimetre, then fold it over onto the ruffle, and it'll just cover your line of stitching. And repeat the same on the other end, press over and over again and pin down. And then we're just going to top stitch it in place. So starting at the small end of the bias, stitch it down there, and then turn, pivot and stitch all the way along, and then repeat at the other end. You'll just see me there, just pivot and then stitch a couple of millimetres again away from the edge, and your bias should just cover the stitching line below, and it gives a really neat finish. And the beauty about doing it this way is that you can control your stitching and your stitchings on the outside, and it's going to be really neat, as opposed to doing it from the other side where sometimes you can't control where you're stitching and sometimes it's not as neat. So I find it's a much better way this way. So now we're just going to put our buttons position for the buttonholes. So get your button. Now I'm using obviously 15mm buttons. If you're using smaller buttons, you would adjust accordingly, and I'm making my 3 buttonhole marks there. But if you want to do 4 or 5, you just adjust the spacing accordingly, and then do your buttonholes on your machine, and then just give it a quick press. And then once we've done that, open up your buttonholes with your stitch ripper, or if you've got one of those button chisel machine things, trim off any excess threads. And then we're just going to place our placket over on top of it, the left side over onto the right side, and we're just going to pin it in place and ready to go on to the sleeves. So the sleeves, it doesn't matter which way you're doing, the short sleeve or the long sleeve, they're constructed the exact same way. So we're going to pin the side seams for the sleeves, and again the short end of the sleeve facing, 1 centimetre seam allowance, stitch and overlock your edges. So once they're all stitched and overlocked and given a nice press, we're going to add the facing to the bottom of the sleeve. Now you've got a notch on your facing and you've got a notch on your sleeve, so match up your notches and also match up your seams and pin that facing in place. So you're matching your raw edges, right sides together. Now you can't go wrong because there's a notch, so you just match up the notch. pin in place, do that for both sleeves, and then stitch it 1 centimetre seam allowance. There's no need to overlock. You can if you want. There's no need to though, because this is going to be encased, because you're going to flip that facing on the inside and there will not be any raw edges showing. So here I am just sewing at 1 centimetre. I'm just going to gently clip, because it's got a slight curve to it, so I'm just clipping the curve there, and then we're just going to press that facing again, so you've got a nice neat edge to play with. And then we're going to press under 1 centimetre all the way around, and then we're going to flip that facing onto the inside of the sleeve. Just turn my sleeve over, so flip the facing on down into the inside, and you will see that your seam should be nice and neat on the edge, the top edge there where you originally stitched it to. So that's the edge to play with, and you can press that with your iron, and then you're just going to pin that facing down all the way around. I'm just giving it a nice press there. And we're going to leave approximately 4 centimetre gap. So just going to mark there with my ruler 4 centimetres and pop a pin in. And we're going to start at the first pin, a couple of millimetres away from the edge. So all the way along and finish at the second pin. And you'll leave, like say, that 4 centimetre gap. And then moving further down, about approximately 2 centimetres further down, we're going to sew all the way around. There's no need to stop and start. Sew from one end and finish at the other end. And that will then create the hole for the casing to pop your elastic through. So measure your wrist or measure your arm for whatever length you need, and I always add 4 centimetres onto the measurement of that, because we're going to then overlap the elastic once we've threaded it through with a pin all the way through the channel there, and pull the other end out. You can either tie it in a knot or sew it on the machine, but you need that extra 2 centimetres on each end to either sew or tie it in a knot. I'm just doing a couple of back stitches there just to secure that elastic, and then we're just going to stitch that gap closed. So you just need to gently pull on the cuff there so you can stitch it closed, and there you should have 2 gorgeous ruffle gathered sleeve cuffs, all neatly encased, no elastic or anything showing. So next it's time to put the sleeves into the bodice. So you match up your notches, so make sure you've got your front sleeves matching. We usually have the 1 notch for the front of the sleeve and 2 notches for the back of the sleeve. So match up your notches, and there'll be 1 notch for the front of the bodice and there'll be 2 notches for the back of the bodice. So you match up those notches, you match up your underarm seams, and you match up the shoulder point notch on the sleeve with the shoulder point of the bodice. Pin all the way around and stitch 1 centimetre seam allowance, followed by whichever method of neatening that you do. So for the final stage, we're just going to add the skirt or the peplum, depending which length you're doing. They're all constructed the same. So we're going to gather up our skirt or peplum to fit into the bodice. Now you need to match up your centre front notches and your centre back notches with the centre of your bodice and the centre point on the back of your bodice, and the side seams of your skirt or peplum with the side seams on your bodice. So you should match all them up, pull your gathers so they're evenly spaced, and then just pin right sides together, raw edges matching the skirt or peplum to the bodice. So I'm just matching up my centre front and my centre back notches, and then I will then match up my side seams, and then I just adjust the gathers in between so they're nice and neat and even, and then we're just going to pin, sew, and then neaten to finish. And all that's left to do now is pull out any gathering stitches that are showing on the right side, and then we just need to sew on our buttons and then give it all a good press. I try it on and twirl a bit and then admire what we've made. And yeah, so that is how to make the Dixie dress and blouse. So I hope you enjoyed following along with me in this tutorial today and made your very own version of the Dixie dress, smock or blouse. Here's the one I made in the tutorial in this viscose chalet, and I shall pop some pictures up of me wearing it so you can see. And yeah, let me know what you think. I hope you enjoy making it. Obviously, if you're going to sew along with me today, you need to download the PDF pattern, and I will pop the link for the pattern in the box below. You just need to print off your size, choose your fabric, cut it out, and then you'll be able to sew along with me. And obviously, if you do make one, please share with me over on Instagram using the hashtag the Dixie dress. So yes, so that's it for today's video, and I shall see you very soon. Bye for now.